Don't forget to subscribe to the socialGup and hit that bell icon for latest videos and updates.
Russell Brand is facing these 5 very serious charges, including rape, indecent assault, sexual assault, and oral rape. And these allegations span from 1999 to 2005 and involve 4 different women. We're talking about the charges that have been brought against Russell Brand. And that's really what we're going to look at today, the details of those charges.
Exactly. And the charges stem from this really extensive investigation that happened last September. If you remember, that was by the Sunday Times, the Times, and Channel 4's dispatches.
Yeah, a joint investigation. And they really dove deep into, a lot of allegations that were being made. And now, like you said, this is the result.
And now it's reached this very serious point. You know, Russell Brand has been charged with multiple sexual offenses, and they cover a period of time between 1999 and 2005.
It's a long time span. And the allegations themselves are, extremely serious. We're talking about 1 count of rape, 1 count of what's called indecent assault, and 1 count of oral rape.
And it's important to note that that term oral rape, it has a specific legal meaning. It refers to a specific act, non-consensual oral penetration.
Right. And then there are 2 further counts of sexual assault as well. So that brings the total to 5 different counts.
5 counts. And those counts are related to the experiences of 4 different women. That's according to the Metropolitan Police.
And of course, Brand has responded. Right after the news broke, he posted a video on, I think it was X, right?
Yes, on X.
And he basically said, look, I absolutely deny these serious allegations. And he specifically said, what I never was a rapist.
And he went on to say that he's never engaged in non-consensual sexual activity, making it clear that he's disputing these claims very strongly.
Yeah, and that he intends to defend himself in court, which of course is his right.
Absolutely. Everyone is entitled to due process and a fair trial. And the courts will now determine the validity of these allegations and decide whether he's guilty or innocent.
So after Brand's video, the police, the Metropolitan Police, they issued a statement confirming the charges. And they gave some details about, the places and the times of the alleged offenses.
Yeah, those details are really important because they lay the groundwork, so to speak, for the prosecution's case. They paint a picture of what they're going to argue in court.
So let's get into some of those specifics. Okay, so the police said that one of the women alleges that she was raped in the Bournemouth area. This was back in 1999.
Right, and then in 2001, there's another woman who alleges she was indecently assaulted in the Westminster area of London.
And when we say indecent assault, just to clarify, that typically refers to a sexual assault that's not legally classified as rape.
Exactly. It falls under that broader category of sexual assault, but with specific legal distinctions.
Right. Then, moving on to 2004, there's a woman who is alleging both oral rape and sexual assault. And again, this was in Westminster.
And that's 2 separate allegations, right? One of oral rape and one of sexual assault.
Yeah. 2 separate charges stemming from the same incident.
And then finally, between 2004 and 2005, another woman alleges she was sexually assaulted, also in the Westminster area. So we're seeing a pattern here in terms of the location of the alleged offenses.
We know that Brand is scheduled to appear at Westminster Magistrates Court on May 2nd.
Right, that's the next date on the calendar. And that initial hearing is likely to be pretty procedural. It's basically the official start of the court case in the UK system.
But there's a wrinkle here, right? Because we understand that Brand is currently believed to be in the U.S.
That's right. Which brings up the question of how they're going to ensure he's actually present for that court appearance. It's not as straightforward as if he were already in the UK.
So how does that typically work? Do they, put out a warrant for his arrest or something?
Not necessarily right away. Usually the first step is to try and reach an agreement with the defendant for them to return to the UK voluntarily, to cooperate with the legal process. But if that doesn't work, if he doesn't agree to return voluntarily, then the authorities might have to consider extradition.
And extradition, that's a whole other can of worms, isn't it?
It definitely can be. It involves a lot of legal back and forth between the 2 countries, the UK and the US in this case.
There was mention of a separate civil case, wasn't there?
Yes, there is a civil case as well. It came out in February that an anonymous woman had filed a claim in the High Court in London.
Right, and that claim is for personal injury and sexual abuse. So we have these 2 separate legal processes running alongside each other, both stemming from similar allegations against Brand.
Precisely. And they'll both proceed through the courts, potentially at different paces and with different outcomes.
Right. So just to kind of recap where we are, Russell Brand is facing these 5 very serious charges, including rape, indecent assault, sexual assault, and oral rape. And these allegations span from 1999 to 2005 and involve 4 different women. And the next key date is that court appearance scheduled for May 2nd at Westminster Magistrates Court. But, as we discussed, his current location in the U.S. adds a layer of complexity with the possibility of a voluntary return or even extradition proceedings.
The police, the Metropolitan Police, they've also renewed their appeal for information. They're asking anyone who might have been affected by this case or anyone who has any relevant information to come forward and speak to them.
And they've even provided a specific email address for that. It's cit@met.police.uk. So let's talk a bit about Russell Brand himself. For people who might not be familiar with his career, he really made his name as a comedian, right?
Yeah, he was a big presence on the UK comedy scene in the early 2000s. He was performing at places like the Hackney Empire and the Edinburgh Fringe, and he really developed this unique comedic persona.
And then he moved into broadcasting.
Yeah, he hosted several TV and radio shows, and a lot of people say that his big break was in the mid-2000s when he hosted Big Brother's Big Mouth.
Right, that was kind of his launch pad to mainstream fame. From there, he went on to host a bunch of other high-profile events. He did the NME Awards, the MTV Awards, the Brits, and he even had his own TV series where he tackled, current affairs and controversial topics.
Yeah, he's definitely making waves and generating a lot of conversation.
But his career hasn't been without controversy.
Yeah.
Most notably, his time at the BBC ended pretty abruptly.
Yeah, that incident back in 2008 where he and Jonathan Ross made those inappropriate phone calls to Andrew Sachs, it caused a huge public outcry, and ultimately it led to his dismissal from the BBC.
Right, it was a big scandal, but he did manage to kind of bounce back from that. He moved to Hollywood and started appearing in films.
To Andrew Sachs, it caused a huge public outcry, and ultimately it led to his dismissal from the BBC.
Right, it was a big scandal, but he did manage to kind of bounce back from that. He moved to Hollywood and started appearing in films. I mean, he's in movies like Forgetting Sarah Marshall and Get Him to the Greek.
He managed to carve out a successful acting career too, showing a different side of his talent.
And then in recent years, he's really shifted his focus to online platforms. He's built up this massive following on places like YouTube. And it really raises some big questions about how we navigate information in this digital age. How do we ensure that accusations are taken seriously while also protecting the rights of the accused to a fair trial?
And how do we make sure that the voices of the alleged victims are heard and that they feel supported, while also recognizing that these are just allegations at this point? Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, and we'll continue to follow this story as it develops.
And as always, thanks to you for listening.